It was a crisp autumn evening in the bustling city of Crestwood, and the air was electric with anticipation. The annual gala at the opulent Riverside Hall was in full swing, a gathering of the city's most affluent and influential figures. The chandeliers sparkled like captured starlight, and the laughter of the elite mingled with the delicate notes of a live orchestra. It was the kind of event where power dynamics were tested, alliances were forged, and reputations were both made and destroyed. Daniel Carter strode into the hall with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him everything. Tall, sharply dressed, and exuding wealth, Daniel was Crestwood's golden boy. He had inherited his father's business empire at a young age and had multiplied its worth tenfold. Yet, his arrogance was as infamous as his business acumen. Daniel thrived on risk, whether in the boardroom or in his personal life. To him, every person, every decision, every challenge was a game, and Daniel always played to win. Tonight, he was surrounded by his usual entourage, a group of equally wealthy and vain individuals who thrived on gossip and audacious dares. Seated at a private table, Daniel swirled a glass of vintage wine and surveyed the room with disinterest. The conversations around him blended into a cacophony of meaningless chatter until a comment from his closest friend, Marcus, cut through the noise. "Daniel," Marcus said with a sly grin, leaning in conspiratorially. "I've got a bet for you. One even you might think twice about." Daniel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Do go on," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Marcus gestured toward the far end of the hall. "You see that woman over there? The one in the green dress?" Daniel followed his gaze and saw her. Emily Green. She was nothing like the women who usually graced these events. Her dress was simple, her figure fuller than the polished women flitting about the room, and her demeanor was far from the practiced poise of the elite. Yet, there was something striking about her, a glow of authenticity and warmth that set her apart. Emily was the owner of a small bakery on the edge of town. She had been invited to the gala after her shop had been featured in a local magazine for its charitable work, often providing meals to struggling families. Emily wasn't a regular in these circles, and it showed in the way she clutched her glass of champagne and glanced around, clearly feeling out of place. "Her?" Daniel asked, unimpressed. "Yes, her," Marcus said, his grin widening. "I bet you can't get her to marry you." Daniel snorted, leaning back in his chair. "That's absurd. Why would I bother?" "Because you've already done it all, Daniel," Marcus replied, his voice dripping with mockery. "You've climbed every mountain, won every game. But this would be a real challenge. Convince her, marry her, and stay with her for, let's say, 6 months. Do that, and I'll give you my villa in the Bahamas." The table erupted in laughter and gasps, and Daniel's interest was piqued. He studied Marcus's face, searching for a sign of bluff, but Marcus seemed serious. Daniel's pride flared. How hard could it be? He was Daniel Carter, after all. "Fine," Daniel said with a smirk. "But when I win, don't cry over your villa." The table cheered, but as Daniel stood to make his way toward Emily, something unexpected flickered in his chest. It wasn't guilt, Daniel rarely felt that, but a fleeting thought: what if she wasn't as easy to manipulate as everyone else? Emily stood by the refreshment table, trying to steady her nerves. She had never been to an event like this before, and she felt completely out of her element. Her bakery was her life's work, and while she loved it, the constant financial struggles made nights like this feel like a dream she didn't belong in. As she reached for a glass of sparkling water, she noticed Daniel approaching. She recognized him immediately. Who didn't know Daniel Carter? And her stomach tightened. What could a man like him possibly want with her? "Emily, right?" Daniel said smoothly, flashing a charming smile. She nodded, caught off guard. "Yes. And you're Daniel Carter." "Guilty as charged," he replied, his smile widening. "I've heard a lot about your bakery." I've been meaning to stop by. Emily laughed nervously. Somehow I doubt that. Daniel tilted his head, feigning offense. You wound me. I have a sweet tooth, you know. She couldn't help but smile at his playful tone, though she remained cautious. Well, if you ever do stop by, the first cupcake is on the house. Deal, Daniel said, raising his glass in a mock toast. But only if you agree to have dinner with me tomorrow. Emily blinked, taken aback. Was he serious? A man like Daniel Carter asking her out? It didn't make sense. But before she could overthink it, she found herself nodding. Okay. Daniel's grin was triumphant, but Emily saw something else in his eyes, something calculating that she couldn't quite place. As he walked away, she felt a knot of unease in her stomach, but she shook it off. It was just dinner, after all. What could go wrong? For Daniel, the next few weeks were a whirlwind of calculated charm and strategic moves. He showered Emily with attention, learning everything he could about her likes and dislikes. He visited her bakery, not just to keep up appearances, but because he found himself oddly curious about her world. It was small, simple, and utterly foreign to him. To his surprise, Emily wasn't like the women he was used to. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or status, and she wasn't afraid to call him out when he was being insincere. There were moments when Daniel found himself genuinely enjoying her company, laughing at her stories, and marveling at her resilience. But he pushed those feelings aside. This was just a game, after all. One evening, as they sat together in her modest apartment, she had insisted on keeping it despite his offers to buy her a mansion. Emily asked him about his day. How's the real estate deal going? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron after finishing a batch of cookies. Daniel hesitated, unsure how to respond. It's fine, he said dismissively. We're finalizing the contracts tomorrow. Emily nodded thoughtfully, sensing his disinterest. You don't sound too excited about it. He shrugged. It's just business. Another deal, another day. Emily leaned forward, her eyes searching his face. Do you ever feel like you're chasing something you can't quite catch? The question caught Daniel off guard. He opened his mouth to retort, to brush off her observation, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he changed the subject, asking about her bakery's finances. Emily, perceptive as ever, didn't press further. Despite his growing discomfort, Daniel remained determined to win the bet. He kept up the charade, attending charity events with Emily on his arm, making grand gestures that were reported in glossy magazines, and charming her friends and neighbors. Yet, no matter how convincing his performance was, there was one person who saw through it all, Emily herself. She wasn't blind to the cracks in Daniel's facade. His smiles didn't quite reach his eyes, and his compliments often felt rehearsed. But what puzzled her most was the way he seemed to watch her when he thought she wasn't looking, as though he was trying to decipher a puzzle he couldn't solve. One day, while cleaning out a drawer in their apartment, Emily stumbled upon a receipt for a private dinner Daniel had hosted shortly before their wedding. Curious, she dug deeper and found a series of text messages on his old phone. They were from Marcus, the man she remembered seeing at their wedding, and they discussed a bet in vague but damning terms. Emily's heart sank as realization dawned. Their entire relationship, his charming pursuit, the lavish wedding, his sudden interest in her life, had been part of some twisted game. She felt a wave of anger and humiliation, but instead of confronting Daniel immediately, she decided to wait. She needed to understand the full extent of what was happening before she acted. Over the next few weeks, Emily quietly observed Daniel, paying closer attention to his behavior. She noticed the way he flinched when someone mentioned their wedding, the way his smile faltered when he thought no one was watching. For all his bravado, there was a vulnerability in him that she hadn't seen before. It confused her, softening the edges of her anger. Meanwhile, Daniel began to notice a shift in Emily's demeanor. She was still kind and patient, but there was a distance between them that hadn't been there before. Her laughter no longer came as easily, and she seemed preoccupied, lost in thought. He couldn't understand what had changed, but it unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. One evening, as they walked home from a local charity event, Emily stopped abruptly and turned to face him. "Daniel," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness, "why did you marry me?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he considered telling her the truth, but fear held him back. Instead, he gave her the answer he thought she wanted to hear. "Because I saw something in you," he said, forcing a smile. "Something real." Emily's eyes searched his, and for a brief moment, he thought she might believe him. But then she nodded, her expression unreadable, and turned away. That night, as Daniel lay awake in bed, he replayed her question in his mind. Why had he married her? The bet had been the catalyst, yes, but as he thought about the moments they had shared, the quiet dinners, the mornings in her bakery, the way she laughed with her whole body, he realized that something had changed. He didn't know when it had happened, but Emily had stopped being a game to him. She had become something much more. For Emily, the revelation of Daniel's betrayal was a turning point. She began to see their marriage not as a partnership but as a challenge, a test of her own resilience and strength. She threw herself into her work, determined to prove that she didn't need Daniel or his wealth to succeed. Yet, despite her anger, she couldn't bring herself to hate him. There were moments when she caught glimpses of the man he could be, the way he helped a struggling employee at the bakery, the rare but genuine smiles he gave her when he let his guard down. It was as though he was fighting a battle within himself, torn between the man he had always been and the man he was becoming. As the days wore on, their relationship became a delicate dance of unspoken truths and growing tensions. Emily knew the time would come when she would have to confront Daniel about the bet, but she wasn't ready yet. She wanted to see if he was capable of change, if there was a chance for something real to grow from the ashes of their deception. Daniel, for his part, began to question everything he had ever believed about himself. The man who had once thrived on power and control now felt lost, adrift in a sea of emotions he didn't know how to navigate. He found himself drawn to Emily in ways he couldn't explain, her strength and resilience forcing him to confront his own shortcomings. As their lives became increasingly intertwined, both Daniel and Emily found themselves standing at a crossroads. The bet that had brought them together was no longer just a game, it was the catalyst for a transformation neither of them had anticipated. But whether their marriage would survive the truth remained to be seen. The storm was coming, and neither of them could escape it. Emily's mind was a tempest of emotions. She had spent countless sleepless nights wrestling with the betrayal she now carried like a hidden wound. Every time she looked at Daniel, a part of her burned with anger, yet another part softened with confusion. The man she had married, under false pretenses, as she now knew, was not a caricature of a villain. There were moments when he seemed sincere, even vulnerable, and it was those glimpses of humanity that stayed her hand from confronting him outright. She needed clarity, so she turned to the one thing that had always brought her peace, her bakery. The early morning hours, before the first customers arrived, became her sanctuary. Rolling out dough, mixing batter, and frosting cakes gave her time to think. But even in the quiet hum of her kitchen, Daniel's presence loomed large in her mind. Meanwhile, Daniel was unraveling. The bet that had started as a light-hearted challenge among friends now felt like a noose tightening around his neck. He couldn't pinpoint when his feelings for Emily had shifted, but he knew they had. The woman he had once dismissed as a pawn in his game had become a force he couldn't ignore. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met, her kindness was genuine, her strength unyielding, and her ability to find joy in the simplest things both baffled and intrigued him. But the weight of his deception was crushing. He could see the distance growing between them, the way Emily's smiles didn't reach her eyes, the way she seemed to retreat into herself. He didn't know what she was thinking, but he felt the walls closing in. One evening, as they sat in the small living room of Emily's apartment, the tension between them finally boiled over. The television played softly in the background, but neither of them was paying attention. Emily was thumbing through a cookbook, her movements distracted, while Daniel stared out the window, lost in thought. "Daniel," Emily said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. He turned to her, his heart skipping a beat. There was a resolve in her eyes that made him uneasy. "I need to ask you something," she continued, her tone measured but firm. "And I want the truth." Daniel swallowed hard, a knot forming in his stomach. "Of course," he said, though his voice betrayed his unease. "Why did you marry me?" The question hung in the air like a thundercloud, and Daniel felt its weight pressing down on him. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time in his life, he didn't have a carefully rehearsed answer, a clever deflection. Emily studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of insincerity. To her surprise, she found none. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "I don't expect you to," he replied. "But I'm willing to spend the rest of my life earning it, if that's what it takes." For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As they continued working, side by side in the warmth of the bakery, the distance between them seemed to shrink, if only a little. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the first time, they were willing to face it together. The following months were a slow, arduous journey for both Daniel and Emily. Trust, once shattered, was a fragile thing to rebuild, and the weight of Daniel's betrayal still lingered between them like an unspoken specter. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, small glimmers of hope began to shine through their strained interactions. Emily, ever resilient, decided to focus on herself and her bakery. If nothing else, she would not allow Daniel's actions to derail the life she had built. Her bakery, once a modest neighborhood staple, was now steadily growing in popularity. Word of mouth had brought new customers, and Emily had started experimenting with unique recipes that showcased her creativity. She poured every ounce of her energy into her craft, finding solace in the rhythmic routine of baking. Daniel, on the other hand, was discovering an entirely new version of himself. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the center of attention, the man with all the answers, or the one holding the reins. He was learning to embrace humility, to admit that he didn't have all the answers, and to understand the value of hard work beyond the pursuit of profit. Every morning, he would wake up before dawn to join Emily at the bakery. He started small, helping with deliveries, sweeping the floors, and eventually learning how to bake under Emily's reluctant but patient guidance. Their moments together were tentative at first, marked by polite exchanges and guarded silences. But as the days turned into weeks, a new rhythm emerged between them, one of quiet companionship. They worked side by side in the bakery, their hands busy with dough and frosting, their conversations becoming more natural, less fraught with tension. For Emily, watching Daniel immerse himself in her world was both confusing and strangely endearing. He seemed genuinely invested, not just in the work but in the people who frequented her bakery. She noticed how he took the time to remember regular customers' names and preferences, how he listened to their stories, and how he smiled, a real, unguarded smile, when he saw their delight at the pastries he had helped create. Still, Emily struggled to reconcile this version of Daniel with the man who had entered her life under false pretenses. She couldn't forget the hurt he had caused, the humiliation of knowing their marriage had started as a cruel bet. But she also couldn't deny the change she was witnessing in him. One particularly busy afternoon, the bakery was packed with customers, and Emily found herself overwhelmed by the sheer volume of orders. Daniel, noticing her stress, stepped in without hesitation. He manned the register, organized the staff, and even jumped into the kitchen to help finish a large catering order. By the end of the day, Emily was exhausted but grateful. As they closed up shop, she turned to him and said, "Thank you for today. I couldn't have done it without you." Daniel looked at her, his expression earnest. "You could've, Emily. You always do. But I'm glad I could help." His words lingered in her mind long after he had gone to bed. For all his flaws, Daniel was proving himself to be someone she could rely on, someone who was trying to make amends. But life, as always, had a way of complicating matters. One evening, as Emily was finishing up the bakery's accounts, she received a text message from an unknown number. The message contained a photo of Daniel and Marcus, sitting together in what looked like a posh restaurant. The timestamp indicated it was from the night before. Beneath the photo was a caption that read, "Still playing the game, I see." Emily's heart sank. She hadn't seen Marcus since the wedding, but she hadn't forgotten his smug demeanor or the way he seemed to revel in his role as Daniel's provocateur. The photo reignited all her doubts and fears. Had Daniel truly changed, or was this just another layer of the facade? She confronted him that night, holding her phone up as he walked into the living room. "What is this, Daniel?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal. Daniel's face fell as he saw the image. "Emily, I can explain," he began, his voice steady but urgent. "Then explain," she said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Because this doesn't look like the actions of someone who's trying to rebuild trust." Daniel sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Marcus reached out to me a few weeks ago. He wanted to meet, to talk. I didn't want to, but I thought, maybe if I faced him, I could finally close that chapter of my life." "And did you?" Emily asked, her eyes narrowing. "I told him the truth," Daniel said. "I told him that the bet was the worst mistake I've ever made, that I regret everything about it, and that I'm done with his games. I didn't want to hide it from you, but I also didn't want to dredge up old wounds." Emily studied his face, searching for any sign of deceit. To her surprise, she found none. But the pain of seeing Marcus's smug face in the photo was still raw. "I need to know that you're being honest with me, Daniel," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I can't do this if I feel like I'm constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop." "I swear to you, Emily," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "I'm done with that life. With those people. All I care about now is you, and proving to you that I'm not the man I used to be." For the first time, Emily saw tears in his eyes. It was a vulnerable, unguarded moment that took her by surprise. "I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again," she admitted. "But I'm willing to try, if you are." Daniel nodded, his relief palpable. "I'll do whatever it takes, Emily. I mean that." From that day forward, their dynamic began to shift. Daniel continued to immerse himself in the bakery, not out of obligation but because he genuinely wanted to be part of Emily's world. He started taking night classes in business management, hoping to use his skills to help her expand the bakery. Emily, though still cautious, began to let her guard down. She started to see Daniel not as the man who had betrayed her, but as someone who was trying, really trying, to change. Their relationship was far from perfect, but it was growing, slowly but surely. They were no longer two people bound by a marriage of convenience, but two individuals learning to navigate the complexities of forgiveness, trust, and love. And as they stood together in the bakery one quiet evening, watching the sunset through the window, Emily found herself daring to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real from the ashes of their past. Emily hesitated. The idea of expansion was daunting, but as she looked at Daniel, she realized he wasn't just presenting a business proposal. This was his way of showing her how much he believed in her, in what she had created, and in their potential as a team. "Let me think about it," she said finally, offering a small smile. As Daniel nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes, Emily felt a warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. A few weeks later, Emily surprised Daniel by agreeing to the expansion. They began scouting locations, and Daniel threw himself into the project with fervor. The process was challenging, filled with unexpected setbacks and obstacles, but together, they navigated each hurdle. As they worked side by side, Emily found herself softening toward Daniel in ways she hadn't expected. She saw how tirelessly he worked, how deeply he cared about her success, and how much he had grown. He no longer reminded her of the arrogant man who had entered her life on a whim. Instead, he had become someone she could rely on, someone who inspired her to dream bigger. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, life threw them another curveball. One evening, as Emily was preparing to close the bakery, Marcus walked through the door. His presence was as unwelcome as it was unexpected, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "Marcus," she said, her voice cold. "What are you doing here?" Marcus smirked, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. "I came to see how you're doing," he said, his tone dripping with insincerity. "Heard the bakery's doing well. Guess Daniel's been more useful than I thought." Emily's jaw tightened. "If you have something to say, just say it," she snapped. Marcus chuckled, leaning against the counter. "I just find it amusing, that's all. You're building this perfect little life together, but you don't seem to realize you're still part of the game." "What are you talking about?" Emily demanded, her heart pounding. "Daniel didn't tell you, did he?" Marcus said, feigning surprise. "The bet wasn't just about marrying you. It was about staying married for a year. And if he does, he gets double the payout." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. She stared at Marcus, her mind racing. "You're lying," she said, though her voice wavered. "Am I?" Marcus said, his smirk widening. "Ask him yourself. Better yet, check his bank account. I'm sure the money will show up right on time." Before she could respond, Daniel walked into the bakery, his face lighting up when he saw Emily, until he noticed Marcus. His expression darkened instantly. "What the hell are you doing here?" Daniel demanded, stepping between Emily and Marcus. "Just having a little chat," Marcus said, his tone smug. "You might want to fill her in on the rest of the story, Daniel. Or should I?" "Get out," Daniel growled, his fists clenched. Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, fine. But don't say I didn't warn you, Emily. Some things never change." As Marcus sauntered out, Emily turned to Daniel, her face pale. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Was there more to the bet?" Daniel's shoulders slumped, his guilt written all over his face. "It doesn't matter," he said. "I told him I'm done with that life, Emily. I haven't spoken to Marcus in months." "But it does matter," she said, her voice rising. "You promised me the truth, Daniel. No more secrets." Daniel hesitated, then sighed deeply. "Yes, there was more to the bet," he admitted. "But I swear to you, Emily, I don't care about the money. I haven't cared about it for a long time. You mean more to me than any of that." Emily stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "Emily, please," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "I've changed. You know I've changed." But Emily couldn't respond. She turned and walked out of the bakery, leaving Daniel standing alone, his heart sinking as the weight of his past mistakes threatened to undo everything they had built. For the next few days, Emily avoided Daniel, needing time to process everything. She confided in her closest friend, Sarah, who reminded her of all the ways Daniel had proven himself over the past year. "He made a mistake," Sarah said gently. "A huge mistake. But look at what he's done since then. Do you really think he's still that man?" Emily didn't answer, but Sarah's words stayed with her. Finally, after days of soul-searching, Emily decided she needed to face Daniel. She found him at the bakery late one night, cleaning up after the day's work. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said, her voice steady. But I'm not ready to walk away, either. Daniel looked up, his eyes filled with hope. I'll wait as long as it takes, he said. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you, Emily. I mean that. As they stood together in the quiet of the bakery, the air between them heavy with unresolved tension, Emily felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, possibility. Their story was far from over, and while the path ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't ready to give up on the chance for something real. The days following Emily's confrontation with Daniel were filled with a fragile, unspoken truce. Though she hadn't left him, the air between them remained heavy with unresolved tension. Daniel threw himself even deeper into work, quietly doing everything he could to demonstrate his commitment. He stopped pressing Emily for forgiveness, choosing instead to let his actions speak louder than words. Meanwhile, Emily struggled with her emotions. Despite everything, a small part of her still hoped for the man she had come to know over the past months to be genuine. She couldn't ignore the changes she'd seen in him, the care he showed toward her bakery, the quiet joy he took in the day-to-day work, and the unexpected kindness he extended to those around him. But the shadow of the bet still loomed large, threatening to taint every positive memory they had created together. Life continued in this uneasy rhythm until one day, an unexpected turn of events shattered their fragile peace. It started when Emily received an invitation to speak at a prestigious culinary conference. The organizers had heard about her bakery's growing success and wanted her to share her journey as an entrepreneur. The invitation was both an honor and a surprise, and Emily's first instinct was to decline. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of people felt overwhelming, especially with her personal life in such turmoil. But Daniel encouraged her. "You should do it," he said one evening as they cleaned up the bakery. "You've built something incredible here, Emily. People deserve to hear your story." Emily hesitated, her hands stilling over the counter she was wiping. "I don't know," she said softly. "I'm not exactly great at public speaking." "You'll be amazing," Daniel said with a small smile. "You always are. And if it helps, I'll be there. Whatever you need, I'll have your back." His words were sincere, and for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a flicker of warmth toward him. She decided to accept the invitation, throwing herself into preparing for the event. The day of the conference arrived, and Emily found herself standing backstage, clutching a set of note cards with trembling hands. The room beyond the curtain buzzed with the chatter of the audience, and the sound only heightened her anxiety. Daniel stood nearby, his expression calm and reassuring. "You've got this," he said, squeezing her shoulder gently. Emily nodded, drawing strength from his presence. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding. The bright lights made it difficult to see the audience, but she focused on her notes, telling the story of how her bakery had started, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned along the way. As she spoke, something unexpected happened. The fear that had gripped her began to fade, replaced by a sense of pride. This was her story, her journey, and she realized that sharing it was a way to celebrate not only her achievements but also the community that had supported her along the way. The audience erupted into applause as she finished, and Emily felt a swell of emotion. She had done it. After the conference, attendees crowded around her, eager to congratulate her and ask questions. Daniel stood on the sidelines, watching with a mixture of pride and quiet admiration. But as the crowd thinned, one person approached Emily who neither of them had expected to see. It was Marcus. "Emily," he said smoothly, ignoring Daniel's glare. "Impressive speech. Truly. I see why the bakery's doing so well." Emily stiffened, her guard immediately rising. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I just wanted to say congratulations," he said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "And to remind you that success often comes with a price." Before Emily could respond, Daniel stepped between them, his expression cold. "You've said your piece, Marcus. Now leave." Marcus smirked. Relax, Daniel. I'm just here as a fan. He glanced back at Emily. But if you ever want to know the full truth about Daniel's past, you know where to find me. With that, he walked away, leaving an uneasy silence in his wake. Emily turned to Daniel, her eyes searching his face. What did he mean by that? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. He's just trying to stir up trouble, he said. Don't let him get to you. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more Marcus wasn't saying. In the days that followed, the encounter with Marcus gnawed at her. She had thought she knew everything about the bet and Daniel's involvement, but Marcus's words suggested otherwise. She debated confronting Daniel again but hesitated, unsure if she could handle another revelation. One evening, as she sat in the bakery after closing, Sarah stopped by. Emily confided in her friend, sharing her doubts and fears. I don't know what to believe anymore, Emily admitted. Every time I think I've moved past it, something drags me back. Sarah was quiet for a moment before speaking. Maybe it's time to stop running from the past, she said. If there's something you need to know, find out. But don't let Marcus control your life. You deserve closure, Emily, one way or another. Her friend's words struck a chord. Emily decided she needed answers, no matter how painful they might be. The next morning, she approached Daniel, her resolve firm. I want to know everything, she said. No more half-truths, no more omissions. If we're going to move forward, I need the whole story. Daniel hesitated, his expression conflicted. But then he nodded, gesturing for her to sit. Over the next hour, he told her everything, about the bet, the stipulations, and how he had initially seen her as nothing more than a challenge. He admitted to the full terms Marcus had set, including the extended timeline and the payout that had been promised. I was an idiot, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I thought it was just a game, but the moment I got to know you, everything changed. I didn't know how to undo the damage I'd caused, so I kept digging myself deeper. But Emily, the money doesn't matter to me. It never did after I fell in love with you. His words were raw and vulnerable, and for the first time, Emily saw the depth of his remorse. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, she said, her voice trembling. But I can see you've changed. And that means something. Daniel nodded, his eyes filled with hope. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of your forgiveness. As the days turned into weeks, Emily found herself slowly letting go of the anger and pain she had held onto for so long. She couldn't change the past, but she could choose how to move forward. And as she and Daniel continued to build their lives together, she began to see that sometimes, the most unexpected journeys lead to the greatest transformations. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was real, forged in the fire of mistakes, redemption, and a shared determination to build something lasting. And as they stood side by side in the bakery, watching the sunrise over their small corner of the world, Emily realized that while their story had begun with a lie, it was ending with something far more powerful, a second chance.